Hello and welcome to the Kathleen Sprackling podcast. I am a woman on a mission to gather a cadre of writers, thinkers, and teachers who are transforming the world one character at a time. But first, I'm teaching Zettelkasten, and I hope you've been enjoying this series because it's getting pretty lengthy now, and tonight's is really interesting because it's about the principle of connection within a Zettelkasten. It's been said many times that a Zettelkasten is a communication partner. It's your second brain. It gives you the ability to actually converse with your box. And I have a very, very fun example of that actually happening in real time today to share with you. So without any further ado and without spoiling the surprise, come on over to my down-facing camera and I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so here we are. Yesterday, when I was working on my podcast for the question that Erica asked about what do you do when a question arises while you're reading syntopically? Should she just put the question on the bib card in a different color of ink? And my response was yes, and. With the and being, it would be a very good idea to make a main card for that question. And I was very busy trying to search for that very thing. I knew I had the perfect example in my bib cards. I had a question that I knew I had written in, but that I had not made a main card for it. And I wanted to use that question as my example of and actually develop the main card for it, and that's what I ended up doing. But I had a heck of a time finding that question because I had not made a main card for it. And I misremembered what book it came out of. So I was hunting high and low trying to find that particular card, and in the process of that search, I stumbled upon this book. It's David Hume, An Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding, with two other items attached to it. And inside this book was this bib card. And the bib card is very sparse. It's not up to my standards at all. It's got a nickname that matches my current convention, DH underscore, and then initials of the title. But where's the publication information? And where's my purpose for reading the book? Well, maybe because I hadn't identified my purpose, I didn't get very far in the book, and I only have this one bib card. However, it's a really fascinating bib card because it ends up tying very neatly to an important question with a Zettelkasten that comes up when you're not electing to use categories. I tend not to like categories. I use them and I don't use them. I'm back and forth on them, but for general knowledge, my feeling is that they get in the way more than they're helpful. Although in a very new Zettelkasten, they might be handy for a little while to get you started, but then you've got long, awkward numbers that go along with that convenience. I'm not debating the question today of whether to have categories or not, but what I wanted to point out today was a very fascinating thought that David Hume mentions right there on page 14. Now, the print's rather fine for trying to share it with you, so I'll just explain what he's talking about. He begins by talking about that every conversation, and in fact, every chain of thoughts, we even say chain of thoughts, but every conversation has a thread. Every thought grouping has a thread as well. No matter how wild the conversation may be, there is always a thread connecting it. Even dreams have a thread. They might wander all over the place, but there's a thread connecting every single moment to the next moment. And that's rather fascinating because a Zettelkasten, if you're not using categories, will also have that same property, that cards will connect off of one another and might get a little bit wild and crazy, the journey that they go on, but you will have that same kind of a thread that you have with a conversation. And that's rather interesting because Luhmann talks about having a dialogue with the conversation, with a notebox, and it's a conversation partner. And that's only possible if you have those threads. If you don't have threads, then you don't have a conversation. And the very point of categories is, what do you do when you have an orphan card that has no conversation that it belongs to? Oh, I know, I'll stick 4 digits in front of the card number, and then I can pretend that it's part of a conversation. Well, it's still an orphan. It's an orphan with 4 extra digits in front of its card number. I'm not really sure what that buys you. So that was an interesting thought. And then there was a second thought that was also captured on this same bib card, which was David Hume's assertion that there's actually 3 types of connection, that it's resemblance, contiguity in time or place, and cause or effect. And I thought to myself, it's going to be interesting to test this, keep an eye on whether or not this proves to be true in a Zettelkasten. All right, so now I had never made a main card from this one lone bib card. I mean, it was just sticking in the book. It was being my place marker. I added the Post-it note tonight. So I thought, okay, I'm going to make a main card for it because it's a very interesting thought. And I ended up deciding to connect the 2 into one main card. So here's the main card that I made today to go with this book that I read heaven knows when and for heaven knows what purpose. And the thought that I captured is what David Hume was saying, that thoughts are connected even down to our dreams. And he hypothesized that there are those 3 forms of connection: resemblance, contiguity, cause and effect. So then my reflection on that is that for a Zettelkasten, this argues against preconceived categories. If you have no thread, then you have no conversation. Plus, do we observe other connecting relationships? I think that should be a question. And then my tagline, which brings the whole card back to memory, is even wild conversations have threads. Zettelkasten 2. That should bring the whole card back to memory. So then I went looking for possible card associations based on the keywords in this card. And I found 3 candidates. And one in particular turned out to be, in my view, the best match. And that's this card here, that an interesting conversation is worth it, is a worthy connection. So this goes back to the concept. This is a personal reflection, quite recent, goes back to May of this year. And it's from a point that I was making at the time, that when a new card chooses its parent, it is not under any obligation to tell you why it chose that card for its parent. It gets to choose it for whatever reason the card wants. Well, that's rather interesting because that's somewhat in opposition to what Hume was saying. Hume was saying you've got 3 possible choices. Pick one and give me your reason. And back in May, I was arguing that no reason is necessary. However, the interesting thing is that when you do have a conversation, that it's good enough just to say that it makes a fine conversation. Well, then will Hume be correct? Because Hume says that when these conversations take place, you have these links. So it might have been me saying last May, you don't have to have a reason connecting them. It just makes a nice conversation. To which Hume would reply, oh yeah? then that means you've got one of three possible connections. So I thought that was rather interesting. And there's a conversation going on right there, a conversation in the box, something that's promised you if you get your Zettelkasten going, provided that you do all the steps. So we do have an interesting conversation. And now the question then is, okay, so this card chose this card as its parent, and they are now connected by contiguity of space, of place, but that's only because I'm forcing it. I'm putting the two together. So yes, now they're contiguous in space. One follows the other. But what was the nature of the connection? Well, the nature of the connection was clearly resemblance, because we had conversations going on here and here. And we had threads, and this one saying, you don't have to tell me your thread. And this one is saying, yeah, you're going to find you've got one of three threads. So they have a resemblance of the threads being involved and it being a conversation. Isn't that wild? So that was kind of a fun one, and I thought I'd share it with you. I hope you enjoyed it. Interesting about the connections, huh? Well, did you notice? I just realized in retrospect that when I started with the down-facing camera, I felt the need to give you a connecting thread between yesterday when I was working on Erica's problem and how I ended up finding this David Hume card. And I had felt the need to give you this connecting thread. So now we have another layer of connections. So that's what a Zettelkasten is really all about, is those connections. The thing that breaks the connections are when you pack cards in densely that all came from the same source and you don't let anything else climb in the middle. Another thing that helps destroy connections is when you go fact, and you never include anything of yourself on the card. That will destroy connections. So what you want to do is, it's like earth, you want to break up the soil and mix different types of clay and sand and humus and all of these different properties into the soil so that it becomes fertile. So that's the intermingling that you get in a Zettelkasten, and it's a whole lot of fun. And I enjoy sharing this with you. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.